What if everything we believe about the first civilizations is backwards? What if the most advanced cities humanity ever built aren't buried in sand or hidden in jungle, but sleeping silently beneath the waves where darkness has kept their secrets for 12,000 years? 40 meters below the crystal waters surrounding Japan's remote Yonaguni island, something extraordinary waits in the blue silence. Massive stone terraces descend like a sunken pyramid into the abyss. Perfect right angles slice through the underwater gloom. Corridors and chambers stretch into the rock as if carved by impossible hands. When marine geologist Masaki Kimura first descended to explore this structure, he found himself swimming through what could only be described as an underwater city, complete with roads, plazas, and monuments that predate every known civilization. The local fishermen have always whispered about this place. They call it the Palace of the Dragon King, Ryugujo from ancient legend, where time stands still and wisdom sleeps beneath the sea. But legends, it turns out, have a way of remembering what history forgets. And as we're about to discover, the sunken monuments of Japan may be trying to tell us something we're not quite ready to hear. The ocean keeps its secrets well. Until now. Beneath the turquoise waters that cradle Japan's southernmost island of Yonaguni, something impossible sleeps in the blue silence. 40 meters down, where sunlight fades to whispers and the weight of the ocean presses against every surface, lies a structure so precise, so deliberate, that it defies every comfortable assumption we hold about the past. This is not the chaotic sculpture of erosion or the random artistry of geological accident. This is architecture, frozen in time beneath the sea. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a marine geologist who has spent decades mapping the ocean floor around Japan's remote islands, still remembers the moment his sonar first painted the impossible on his screen. Massive stone terraces descending in perfect steps toward the abyss. Corridors carved with surgical precision into solid rock. Chambers that opened like doorways into mysteries that shouldn't exist. When he first descended in his submersible to witness this underwater monument with his own eyes, Tanaka found himself swimming through what could only be described as a sunken city, complete with plazas, staircases, and walls that rose like silent sentinels from the seafloor. The structure stretches over 150 meters in length and rises nearly 30 meters from the ocean bottom, its surfaces decorated with what appear to be carved symbols and geometric patterns that pulse with meaning in the underwater twilight. Every angle is deliberate, every surface intentional. But it is the precision that haunts you. The steps are not rough-hewn blocks tumbled by ancient earthquakes or smoothed by millennia of current. They are cut with edges so sharp they could have been carved yesterday, each rising exactly 20 centimeters in height, each spanning precisely 4 meters in width. The corridors that tunnel into the rock maintain perfect 90-degree angles, their walls parallel to a tolerance that would challenge modern engineering. When Tanaka's underwater lights swept across these surfaces for the first time, the geometry was so exact, so impossibly clean, that he initially suspected his instruments were malfunctioning. The local fishermen who work these waters have always known something rested beneath the waves. For generations, they've spoken of the Dragon King's palace, Ryugujo, where time moves differently, and the sea gods keep their ancient wisdom. They warned Tanaka's research team about diving too deep, about staying too long in the presence of something that was never meant for human eyes. Yet their legends, passed down through centuries of whispered stories, describe perfectly what the scientists would later map with sonar and submersibles. A stepped pyramid crowned with platforms, chambers that echo with the weight of forgotten years, and passages that lead deeper into mysteries the ocean has guarded since the world was young. As Tanaka's team began their systematic exploration, using robotic submersibles to probe corridors too narrow for human divers, they discovered that the structure was far more complex than initial surveys suggested. What appeared to be a simple terraced monument was revealed as an intricate network of chambers, each connected by passages that followed geometric principles lost to modern understanding. The walls bore markings that resembled script, though no linguist could identify the language. Circular depressions in the stone seemed designed to hold objects now long disappeared, while channels carved into the floor suggested a sophisticated drainage or ceremonial system. Most unsettling of all was the structure's orientation. Every major axis aligned perfectly with celestial events: the summer solstice, the winter equinox, and the position of certain constellations as they would have appeared thousands of years ago. This was not random construction. This was astronomy rendered in stone, a calendar built to last beneath the waves. But who could have possessed such knowledge 12,000 years ago, when conventional history tells us humanity was still discovering agriculture? The deeper Tanaka's team explored, the more questions multiplied, like ripples spreading across still water. Core samples taken from the sea floor around the structure revealed something even more disturbing. The monument had been above sea level as recently as 12,000 years ago, during the final melt of the last ice age. This meant that whoever built it had witnessed the world's transformation, had watched helplessly as rising waters swallowed their creation. The precision of the carving, the sophisticated understanding of astronomy, the sheer ambition of the project, all of it spoke to a level of civilization that history claims could not have existed. Yet here it rests, 40 meters beneath the surface, its stones keeping secrets that threaten to rewrite everything we thought we knew about human development. The sleeping pyramid of Yonaguni is not merely an anomaly. It is evidence. Evidence that advanced civilizations rose and fell long before our textbooks claim they were possible, and that the ocean itself may be the world's largest graveyard of human achievement. But Yonaguni is not alone in its silent testimony. Across the Pacific, other monuments wait beneath the waves, each whispering the same impossible story. The fishermen of Yonaguni have always spoken in hushed tones about Ryugujo, the underwater palace where the Dragon King holds court beneath the waves. In their stories, it is a realm where time flows like honey, where a single day in the depths can span centuries on the surface, and where ancient wisdom sleeps in chambers carved from living coral and pearl. For generations, these tales were dismissed as folklore, colorful legends spun from the imagination of seafaring communities. But as Dr. Tanaka's research expanded beyond the initial monument, the boundary between myth and memory began to blur in ways that made even the most skeptical scientists pause. What they discovered beneath the waters surrounding Japan's southernmost islands was not a single anomalous structure, but the remnants of an entire drowned landscape. Sonar mapping revealed a vast underwater terrain of terraces, roads, and building foundations stretching across the seafloor like the ghostly outline of a lost civilization. The Yonaguni monument was not alone. It was merely the most visible peak of a submerged world that once existed above the waves. Professor Hiroshi Nakamura, a marine archaeologist who joined Tanaka's team in the second year of exploration, brought with him decades of experience studying Japan's ancient cultures. Yet nothing in his academic training had prepared him for what the ocean floor revealed. Systematic surveys using advanced sonar and underwater robotics mapped over 300 square kilometers of structured formations, each showing clear signs of intentional design and sophisticated engineering. The implications were staggering. If these formations were indeed artificial, they represented evidence of a maritime civilization that had flourished when the world was a fundamentally different place. 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, global sea levels stood nearly 120 meters lower than they do today. Vast continental shelves that are now submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water were then fertile plains, river valleys, and coastal regions where advanced cultures could have developed over millennia. What Nakamura's team was mapping was not simply a collection of underwater ruins, but the drowned remains of an entire world. The Sundaland region, which once connected Japan to the Asian mainland through Korea and extended south, too, encompass what are now the scattered islands of Indonesia and the Philippines, had been a vast continent during the Ice Age. When the glaciers melted and the seas rose with catastrophic speed, entire civilizations would have watched their world disappear beneath the waves in what must have seemed like divine punishment. The rising waters did not come gradually over centuries, allowing populations to adapt and migrate. Recent geological studies suggest the meltwater pulse occurred in dramatic surges, with sea levels rising as much as several meters per decade. Imagine the terror of those final generations who witnessed their world's end. Coastal cities that had stood for millennia would have been swallowed by the advancing tide within a few human lifespans. Sacred temples, marketplaces, harbors, and homes, entire civilizations built over thousands of years, disappeared beneath waters that rose faster than trees could grow. The survivors would have been forced to flee inland, carrying only fragments of their culture, their knowledge reduced to stories whispered around fires in mountain caves. Dr. Yuki Sato, a climatologist specializing in ancient weather patterns, joined the research team to help reconstruct the environmental conditions that existed when these structures were built. Her ice core data from Antarctic drilling projects revealed that the period between 15,000 and 11,000 years ago was marked by violent climate instability. The transition from Ice Age to modern warm period was not smooth, but punctuated by sudden shifts that would have seemed apocalyptic to anyone living through them. The most dramatic event occurred around 12,800 years ago, when temperatures plummeted suddenly across the northern hemisphere in what geologists call the Younger Dryas period. For over 1,000 years, the world was plunged back into near glacial conditions. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the cold ended, and the great melt accelerated with unprecedented speed. In geological terms, it was instantaneous. In human terms, it was the end of everything they had ever known. The scattered survivors who fled to higher ground would have carried with them fragments of their drowned civilization. Star maps etched in memory, construction techniques passed down through generations, and most importantly, the stories. These refugees became the mysterious teachers and culture bearers who appear in later mythologies across the Pacific. The Polynesian legends of Mu, the Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime stories of the Great Flood, the Japanese tales of gods emerging from the sea, all may be cultural memories of this same catastrophic event, preserved and retold until history became myth. As Nakamura studied the underwater formations around Yonaguni, he began to recognize architectural elements that seemed to echo in later Japanese construction. The precise stone-fitting techniques, the astronomical alignments, even the sacred geometry, all bore resemblances to structures built thousands of years later by cultures that claimed their knowledge came from divine teachers who emerged from the sea after the Great Flood. Perhaps the Dragon King's palace was never a myth at all. Perhaps it was memory, encoded in story because the truth was too vast and terrible to speak plainly. And if that was true, then what other memories might be sleeping beneath the waves, waiting to surface when humanity is finally ready to remember what it once was? The orthodox archaeological community's response to the Yonaguni discoveries was swift and predictable. Professor Emeritus Tetsuo Watanabe of Tokyo University, one of Japan's most respected authorities on prehistoric cultures, published a scathing critique that dismissed the underwater structures as natural geological formations sculpted by tectonic activity and ocean currents. His argument was compelling in its simplicity. 12,000 years ago, Japan was inhabited only by the Jomon people, a hunter-gatherer culture that, while sophisticated in their own way, lacked the organizational capacity and technological knowledge to construct monumental architecture. For decades, this view had dominated academic understanding of Japan's prehistory. The Jomon, whose name derives from the distinctive cord-marked pottery they created, were indeed remarkable for their artistic achievements and their early adoption of ceramics. Some of the world's oldest pottery has been found in Japanese archaeological sites dating back over 14,000 years. But they were, according to conventional wisdom, fundamentally a Stone Age people who lived in small, scattered communities, surviving on hunting, fishing, and gathering wild plants. The idea that they could have built anything resembling the massive, precisely engineered structures found beneath Yonaguni's waters seemed not just unlikely, but impossible. Yet, as Dr. Akiko Yamamoto, a specialist in Jomon culture at Kyoto University, began to re-examine the archaeological evidence in light of the underwater discoveries, she found herself questioning assumptions that had guided her entire career. The more closely she studied Jomon sites across Japan, the more anomalies she discovered. Evidence that suggested these ancient people were far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The pottery alone should have been a clue. Jomon ceramics were not crude vessels hastily formed for basic survival needs. They were masterworks of artistic vision and technical skill, featuring complex spiral and flame-like decorations that required an understanding of symmetry, proportion, and mathematical relationships. Some vessels stood over a meter tall and were decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to encode astronomical information. The famous flame pottery of the Niigata region, dating to 5,500 years ago, displayed such sophisticated artistry that modern ceramicists struggled to replicate the techniques. More puzzling still were the stone circles. At sites like Oyu in northern Japan, massive stone rings dating to 4,000 years ago stretch across hundreds of meters, their arrangement following precise geometric principles. The stones were transported from quarries over 50 kilometers away and positioned with astronomical accuracy that rivals Stonehenge. These were not simple ritual sites created by nomadic hunter-gatherers. They were monumental constructions requiring advanced planning, mathematical knowledge, and coordinated labor on a scale that challenged every assumption about Jomon society. Dr. Yamamoto's research revealed that the Jomon had also developed sophisticated settlements with populations that may have reached several thousand people, far larger and more complex than the small nomadic bands previously envisioned. But it was her discovery at the Sanai Maruyama site in northern Japan that truly shattered conventional wisdom about Jomon capabilities. Excavations revealed a planned community dating to 5,900 years ago, complete with massive wooden structures, including a 6-story building that required advanced engineering knowledge to construct. The settlement showed evidence of long-distance trade networks, sophisticated food storage systems, and even primitive forms of agriculture, all achievements that supposedly didn't exist in Japan until the arrival of rice farming cultures from the mainland over 2,000 years later. Most intriguing of all were the wooden posts discovered in precise geometric arrangements throughout the site. Analysis revealed that these posts were positioned according to astronomical calculations, marking the movements of the sun, moon, and stars with mathematical precision that rivaled ancient observatories in Egypt and Mesopotamia. The Jomon were not merely surviving in the wilderness, they were studying the heavens and encoding their observations into the very structure of their communities. When Yamamoto compared the astronomical alignments at Sanai Maruyama with the orientation of the underwater structures at Yonaguni, she found disturbing correlations. Both sites showed evidence of sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics, and both incorporated the same geometric principles in their construction. Could the Jomon have inherited this knowledge from an earlier, more advanced civilization? Or were they themselves the builders of the monuments that now rest beneath the waves? The academic establishment's resistance to these questions was fierce and immediate. Peer-reviewed journals rejected Yamamoto's papers, conference organizers canceled her presentations, and senior colleagues warned her that pursuing such fringe theories would destroy her career. The very suggestion that Japan's prehistoric inhabitants might have possessed advanced knowledge challenged not just archaeological timelines, but the fundamental narrative of human progress itself, the comfortable belief that civilization develops in a straight line from primitive to sophisticated. Yet the evidence continued to accumulate. Carbon dating of organic materials found within the underwater structures consistently returned dates between 10,000 and 12,000 years old, precisely the period when the most sophisticated Jomon settlements flourished on dry land. Stoneworking techniques found at both underwater and terrestrial sites showed remarkable similarities. Even the symbolic artwork carved into Yonaguni's submerged walls echoed motifs found in Jomon pottery and sculptures. Perhaps the most unsettling discovery was that the Jomon were not alone in their advanced capabilities. Across the Pacific, other primitive cultures had achieved similar levels of sophistication at roughly the same time period, as if some kind of knowledge had spread across the ocean in ways that conventional archaeology could not explain. The Pacific Ocean covers 1/3 of the Earth's surface, yet for centuries, Western archaeologists treated it as an empty barrier rather than a highway of ancient civilizations. This perspective began to change when Dr. Kenji Matsuda, a comparative archaeologist specializing in megalithic structures, embarked on a systematic study of monumental sites across the Pacific Basin. What he discovered challenged every assumption about the isolation and primitive nature of ancient Pacific cultures. From Easter Island's enigmatic Moai statues to the massive stone platforms of Nan Madol in Micronesia, from the terraced pyramids of Gunung Padang in Indonesia to the precisely fitted stonework of Tiwanaku in Bolivia, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. Despite being separated by thousands of miles of open ocean, these sites shared construction techniques, astronomical alignments, and symbolic motifs that seemed far too specific to be mere coincidence. At Nan Madol, often called the Venice of the Pacific, enormous basalt logs weighing up to 50 tons were somehow transported across water and fitted together to create artificial islands and massive ceremonial platforms. Local legends claim the stones were levitated into place by twin sorcerer kings using magical powers. A story that archaeologists dismiss as myth, even though they have no conventional explanation for how such massive construction could have been accomplished by a culture that supposedly lacked advanced technology. The parallels with Yonaguni were unmistakable. Both sites featured precisely cut stone blocks fitted without mortar. Both showed evidence of advanced understanding of hydraulic engineering, and both were associated with legends of divine builders who emerged from the sea. Matsuda's research took on new urgency when geological surveys revealed that many of these Pacific monuments were far older than previously believed. At Gunung Padang in West Java, ground-penetrating radar and carbon dating suggested that the massive terraced pyramid might be over 25,000 years old, making it potentially the oldest megalithic structure on Earth. If accurate, this predated the supposed invention of agriculture by over 15,000 years and pushed back the timeline of advanced civilization to an almost incomprehensible antiquity. The implications were staggering. If these sites were truly ancient, they suggested the existence of a sophisticated maritime civilization that had flourished when most of the world was locked in Ice Age conditions. But how could such a civilization have developed the technology and organizational skills necessary to transport massive stone blocks across thousands of miles of open ocean? How could isolated island cultures have independently developed identical construction techniques and astronomical knowledge? Dr. Tomoko Ishikawa, a specialist in Pacific navigation and ancient seafaring, joined Matsuda's team to investigate this puzzle. Her research into traditional Polynesian navigation techniques revealed that ancient Pacific islanders possessed far more sophisticated knowledge of ocean travel than Western scholars had ever imagined. Using only the stars, wave patterns, and wind directions, Polynesian navigators could traverse thousands of miles of open ocean with pinpoint accuracy, reaching islands that European explorers with compasses and charts often missed entirely. But Ishikawa's most intriguing discovery came when she analyzed the oral traditions preserved by Pacific island cultures. Despite being separated by vast distances, many of these societies shared remarkably similar creation myths and legends of ancestral teachers. The Polynesian stories of Lemuria, the Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime tales of the Rainbow Serpent, the Micronesian legends of Nan Madol's Sorcerer Kings, all described advanced beings who arrived by sea after a great catastrophe and taught the survivors how to build, navigate, and read the stars. Even more compelling was the linguistic evidence. Comparative analysis revealed that certain technical terms related to astronomy, navigation, and megalithic construction appeared in similar forms across Pacific languages that supposedly had no historical contact. Words for specific stellar configurations, stone-cutting techniques, and architectural proportions showed patterns of distribution that suggested ancient cultural diffusion on a scale far greater than conventional archaeology allowed. When Ishikawa mapped the locations of the most sophisticated megalithic sites against ocean current patterns and prevailing winds, she discovered that they formed a coherent network of way stations that would have facilitated long-distance maritime travel during the Ice Age, when sea levels were lower and many now submerged islands provided stepping stones across the Pacific Basin. The evidence pointed to something unprecedented in conventional archaeology, a prehistoric maritime civilization that had achieved global reach thousands of years before the supposed invention of ocean-going vessels. These ancient seafarers had not only mastered the art of navigation across vast distances, but had also developed standardized construction techniques, astronomical knowledge, and cultural practices that they spread from island to island across the world's largest ocean. But if such a civilization had existed, what had happened to it? The answer lay in the same geological evidence that had drawn researchers to Yonaguni in the first place. The catastrophic rise in sea levels at the end of the Ice Age would have submerged not only coastal settlements, but entire chains of low-lying islands that had served as stepping stones for ancient mariners. The Pacific Ring of Memory was not just a network of monuments, it was a graveyard of drowned civilizations, their greatest achievements now lying beneath hundreds of feet of water. As Matsuda and his team prepared to expand their underwater surveys beyond Yonaguni, they realized they were not just investigating isolated archaeological anomalies, but uncovering evidence of humanity's first global civilization. The question that haunted them was not whether such a civilization had existed, but how much of its knowledge had been lost forever beneath the rising seas of the ancient world. The East China Sea holds secrets that governments would prefer to keep buried beneath its murky waters. In 2019, Dr. Ryota Sasaki, a marine archaeologist working with an international deep-sea research consortium, was conducting routine sonar mapping of the continental shelf between Japan and mainland China when his instruments detected something that should not have existed. At depths of 40 to 60 meters, where the ancient coastline once stretched before the post-glacial floods, geometric patterns emerged from the seafloor with the unmistakable regularity of human construction. The initial sonar images showed what appeared to be a vast underwater city spanning over 200 square kilometers, larger than many modern metropolitan areas. Perfectly straight lines intersected at right angles, forming a grid pattern that could only have been the result of deliberate urban planning. Circular formations suggested temple complexes or ceremonial centers, while parallel ridges running for kilometers resembled the remains of massive walls or causeways. When Sasaki's team deployed their most advanced underwater rovers to investigate the structures up close, they discovered carved stone blocks arranged in precise formations, some bearing inscriptions in an unknown script. The stonework showed the same sophisticated cutting and fitting techniques found at Yonaguni, but on an even grander scale. Massive pillars, some over 10 meters in height, stood in perfect rows beneath the sediment, their surfaces decorated with spirals, astronomical symbols, and what appeared to be maps of the heavens. Most intriguing of all were the stepped pyramid structures that rose from the seafloor like underwater ziggurats, their terraced sides ascending toward what had once been dry land. But it was the inscriptions that truly set these discoveries apart from anything found at other underwater sites. Unlike the geometric symbols at Yonaguni, these carvings appeared to be a form of writing, complex characters arranged in columns and rows that suggested a sophisticated written language. Dr. Emiko Fujiwara, a specialist in ancient Asian scripts who was brought in to analyze the inscriptions, found herself confronting symbols that bore tantalizingly familiar elements from various Asian writing systems, yet belonged to none of them completely. Some characters resembled archaic Chinese ideographs, others echoed early Japanese kana, and still others seemed to incorporate elements of Korean Hangul, but all appeared to predate the historical development of these writing systems by thousands of years. It was as if the underwater inscriptions preserved a proto-language from which later Asian scripts had evolved, a mother tongue that had been lost to time and flood. The Chinese government's response to these discoveries was swift and concerning. Within months of Sasaki's initial reports, the entire area was declared a restricted military zone. Foreign research vessels were banned from the region, and even Chinese marine archaeologists found their access severely limited. Official statements dismissed the structures as natural geological formations, but satellite images captured before the restrictions were imposed showed clear evidence of ongoing excavation activities conducted in strict secrecy. Leaked documents from within the Chinese archaeological establishment spoke of artifacts being recovered that challenged conventional understanding of East Asian prehistory. According to these classified reports, the underwater excavations had uncovered jade artifacts carved with astronomical data that matched star positions from over 10,000 years ago, ceramic vessels decorated with maps of coastlines that no longer existed above sea level, and most remarkably, bronze implements that predated the supposed invention of bronze working in Asia by several millennia. If authentic, these artifacts suggested that the drowned civilization had possessed metallurgical and astronomical knowledge that wouldn't be officially developed in the region until thousands of years later. Dr. Sasaki, now effectively barred from returning to his own discovery, began reaching out to international colleagues who had experience with similar underwater sites. Through encrypted communications with researchers studying submerged structures off the coasts of India, the Mediterranean, and the Caribbean, he discovered a disturbing pattern. Wherever significant underwater archaeological sites had been identified, government interference followed. Research was restricted, findings were classified, and scientists who persisted in their investigations often found their careers quietly derailed. The implications were staggering. If governments around the world were actively suppressing evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations, it suggested that the true scope of these discoveries was far greater than the public had been allowed to know. The scattered reports of underwater cities, impossibly ancient artifacts, and sophisticated construction techniques were not isolated anomalies. They were fragments of a deliberately obscured reality. Traditional Chinese legends began to take on new meaning in light of these discoveries. Stories of Penglai, the mystical island where immortal beings dwelled in palaces of jade and pearl, had always been dismissed as pure mythology. But ancient Chinese texts described Penglai as lying somewhere in the eastern seas, accessible only by those who possessed special knowledge of navigation and the favor of the sea gods. The descriptions of its architecture, massive stone foundations rising from the water, terraced gardens ascending toward the heavens, and halls decorated with astronomical symbols, bore striking resemblances to the structures now hidden beneath the East China Sea. Even more intriguing were the historical accounts of Chinese emperors sending expeditions to find Penglai and retrieve the secrets of immortality supposedly held by its inhabitants. These expeditions, launched during the Qin and Han dynasties, never returned. Had they discovered something that subsequent rulers deemed too dangerous to acknowledge? Had they found evidence of a civilization so advanced that its existence threatened the legitimacy of earthly emperors who claimed the mandate of heaven? As Dr. Sasaki compiled his secret dossier of evidence from the East China Sea discoveries, he realized that he was documenting not just archaeological anomalies, but deliberate historical erasure. The underwater temples and their inscriptions were not merely ancient, they were revolutionary. They suggested that the story of human civilization was not one of steady progress from primitive beginnings, but of recurring cycles of advancement and catastrophe, with each new age built upon the drowned foundations of the last. But the temples beneath the East China Sea were only the beginning. Deeper waters held even stranger secrets. The discoveries beneath Yonaguni and the East China Sea might have remained isolated mysteries, if not for the obsessive work of Dr. Haruto Mizuno, a geophysicist whose specialty in electromagnetic field mapping led him down an unexpected path. While studying natural energy patterns around Japan's ancient volcanic systems, Mizuno noticed peculiar magnetic anomalies that seemed to correspond with the locations of both above-ground sacred sites and the newly discovered underwater structures. Using advanced magnetometer arrays and ground-penetrating radar, Mizuno began mapping what appeared to be invisible lines of energy that connected Japan's most sacred locations in a vast geometric network. Mount Fuji, the Ise Grand Shrine, the ancient burial mounds of the Yamato dynasty, and the underwater monument at Yonaguni all fell along precise geometric alignments that followed mathematical principles based on the golden ratio and other sacred proportions found in nature. But these were not random spiritual concepts imposed by human imagination. The alignments corresponded to actual measurable phenomena: underground water systems, mineral deposits, and electromagnetic field variations that created a subtle but detectable energy grid across the entire archipelago. Ancient Japanese texts referred to these pathways as dragon lines, currents of earth energy that connected sacred places and influenced the flow of natural forces. What stunned Mizuno was the precision of the network. The angles between connection points were based on complex geometric calculations that demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of both terrestrial mathematics and celestial mechanics. Whoever had established this system possessed knowledge of the Earth's magnetic field, its rotational dynamics, and the gravitational influences of celestial bodies that modern science had only recently begun to understand. The implications became even more extraordinary when Mizuno compared his energy maps with the architectural plans of Japan's oldest temples and shrines. Without exception, these sacred structures had been positioned at critical nodes in the Dragon Line network, and their internal layouts followed the same geometric principles that governed the larger system. The famous torii gates that mark the entrance to Shinto shrines weren't merely symbolic portals. They were precisely positioned instruments designed to interact with the natural energy flows of their locations. Dr. Keiko Taniguchi, an expert in archaeoastronomy who joined Mizuno's research team, made an even more startling discovery when she analyzed the celestial alignments of the Dragon Line network. The entire system appeared to be calibrated to track the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble in Earth's rotation that causes the position of stars to shift gradually over a 26,000-year cycle. This was knowledge that mainstream archaeology claimed wasn't discovered until ancient Babylon. Yet the Japanese dragon lines encoded this information in stone and earth thousands of years earlier. Most remarkably, the network seemed designed to accommodate changes in the Earth's magnetic field that occur over geological timescales, suggesting its creators understood planetary dynamics on a scale that modern science had only recently begun to appreciate. When Mizuno overlaid his Dragon Line maps with the locations of Japan's underwater archaeological sites, the connections became impossible to ignore. Yonaguni sat at a major convergence point where multiple energy lines intersected, and the recently discovered structures in the East China Sea formed additional nodes in what appeared to be an even larger network extending beneath the ocean floor. The underwater monuments weren't isolated ruins. They were integral components of a sophisticated energy management system that had once operated both above and below sea level. The mathematical precision of this network became even more apparent when Taniguchi calculated the specific angles and distances involved. The system utilized what she recognized as sacred geometry, mathematical relationships found throughout nature in the spiral of nautilus shells, the branching patterns of rivers, and the orbital mechanics of planetary systems. The dragon lines weren't arbitrary spiritual concepts, but practical applications of universal mathematical principles that governed everything from atomic structure to galactic formation. This revelation forced a complete reconsideration of what the ancient builders had been trying to accomplish. Rather than constructing simple monuments or temples, they appeared to have been creating a kind of planetary instrument, a vast network designed to harmonize human settlements with the natural energy flows of the Earth itself. The implications were staggering. If such a system had once functioned as intended, it would have represented a level of ecological integration that modern civilization could barely comprehend. But understanding the sophistication of the Dragon Line network only deepened the central mystery. Why had such advanced knowledge been lost? How had a civilization capable of mapping planetary energy systems and encoding astronomical data into massive construction projects simply vanished from historical memory? The precision and scope of the network suggested not only advanced scientific understanding, but also the organizational capacity to implement continent-spanning projects over multiple generations. Mizuno's research into historical records revealed tantalizing clues that the Dragon Line system had remained partially functional well into Japan's recorded history. Ancient court documents spoke of earth harmony specialists who maintained sacred sites according to principles that modern readers could barely comprehend. These specialists possessed detailed maps of energy flows and conducted regular ceremonies designed to keep the network balanced and operational. The knowledge had been deliberately preserved by secretive lineages of priests and architects who understood its importance even if they no longer fully comprehended its scientific basis. But over centuries, as political powers shifted and foreign influences transformed Japanese culture, this ancient wisdom was gradually suppressed, its practitioners scattered or silenced. And yet the network itself remained, waiting beneath layers of modern ignorance for someone to rediscover its true purpose. Along Japan's northeastern coast, weathered stones stand like silent sentinels bearing messages carved by hands long dead. These tsunami stones, scattered across coastal villages from Hokkaido to Honshu, carry warnings etched in classical Japanese characters. Do not build your homes below this. Point. The high water comes. It will come again. Some of these monuments date back over 1,000 years, marking the high water marks of catastrophic waves that periodically sweep across Japan's vulnerable coastlines. Dr. Yusuke Ito, a specialist in historical seismology at Tohoku University, had spent years cataloging these ancient warnings when the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami provided a terrible validation of their accuracy. In village after village, the massive waves stopped almost exactly at the lines marked by the ancient stones. Those communities that had heeded the warnings of their ancestors and built above the markers survived relatively intact. Those that had ignored them or forgotten their meaning were devastated. But as Ito compiled his research in the wake of the disaster, he began to notice patterns that extended far beyond simple flood warnings. The positioning of the stones corresponded not only to tsunami heights, but to the Dragon Line network that Mizuno had mapped across the archipelago. Moreover, many of the stones bore additional inscriptions that referenced astronomical events, eclipses, comet appearances, and stellar alignments that seemed to connect seismic activity with celestial cycles. The implications were profound. The ancient Japanese had not simply recorded past disasters. They had identified the cyclical patterns that governed them, creating a sophisticated early warning system based on both terrestrial and astronomical observations. Ito's research into historical earthquake records revealed a disturbing regularity in Japan's seismic activity. Major earthquakes occurred in predictable cycles that correlated with specific astronomical events, solar maxima, lunar standstills, and the gravitational alignments of outer planets. The ancient stone carvers had documented these connections with remarkable precision, encoding complex astronomical data into seemingly simple warning messages. The most ancient tsunami stones, those dating back over 1,200 years, contained the most sophisticated astronomical references. These earliest monuments marked not just flood levels, but the positions of specific star constellations at the time of the disasters they commemorated. When Ito worked with astronomers to reverse calculate the night sky as it would have appeared during these ancient catastrophes, he discovered that the stones served as a kind of three-dimensional star map, preserving the exact celestial conditions that had coincided with each seismic event. Dr. Sachiko Watanabe, a geological chronologist who joined Ito's research team, made an even more startling discovery when she analyzed core samples from sediment layers near the tsunami stones. The geological record showed that Japan's catastrophic earthquakes followed a roughly 1,000-year cycle, with clusters of intense seismic activity separated by longer periods of relative calm. The pattern had repeated for at least 10,000 years, suggesting that the island's geological instability was governed by forces operating on millennial timescales. Most troubling was her calculation of when the current cycle would reach its peak intensity. According to Watanabe's analysis of the geological record, Japan was entering the most seismically active phase of the millennial cycle. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake, devastating as it was, appeared to be merely the opening movement of a larger symphony of destruction that would unfold over the coming decades. The ancient tsunami stones seemed to confirm this assessment. Many bore inscriptions warning not just of single catastrophic events, but of the time of many shakings, periods when the earth would convulse repeatedly over several generations. The most ominous discovery came when the research team examined the positioning of Yonaguni and the other underwater structures in relation to the seismic cycle. The monuments appeared to have been built during previous peak periods of geological activity, when massive earthquakes would have repeatedly reshaped the coastlines and altered the flow patterns of the Dragon Line network. Rather than avoiding these catastrophic periods, the ancient builders seemed to have deliberately timed their construction to coincide with them. This suggested a level of long-term planning that spanned not just human generations, but geological epochs. The underwater monuments weren't simply casualties of rising sea levels. They were designed to survive submersion, to continue functioning as part of the energy network even when buried beneath the waves. The dragon lines, the tsunami stones, and the submerged temples formed components of a disaster management system that operated on a timescale almost incomprehensible to modern thinking. Perhaps the ancient builders had understood something that modern Japan was only beginning to rediscover, that living in harmony with the Earth's cycles required acknowledging their destructive as well as creative phases. The tsunami stones weren't just warnings, they were invitations to participate in a larger conversation between human civilization and planetary forces. Their astronomical inscriptions suggested that the ancient Japanese had viewed seismic activity not as random catastrophe, but as part of a cosmic rhythm that connected the movement of tectonic plates with the dance of celestial bodies. They had learned to read the Earth's moods through the language of the stars, developing a form of geological prophecy that modern science was only beginning to understand. When Ito compared the locations of the tsunami stones with Mizuno's Dragon Line maps, he found that the most accurate and detailed warning monuments had been positioned at critical nodes in the energy network. The stones weren't just marking flood levels, they were calibrating the entire system, ensuring that each component of the ancient infrastructure remained properly aligned with the natural forces it was designed to channel and moderate. This realization cast the underwater structures in an entirely new light. Rather than being victims of catastrophe, they might have been essential components of a disaster mitigation system that had operated successfully for millennia. The monuments at Yonaguni and beneath the East China Sea weren't ruins at all. They were still functioning elements of an ancient technology designed to help human civilization survive the Earth's most violent moods. But if that was true, then their current abandonment and ignorance might be leaving modern Japan dangerously vulnerable to forces their ancestors had learned to manage. The answers to Japan's ancient mysteries might be written not in stone or star charts, but in the very DNA of the Japanese people themselves. Dr. Naomi Hayashi, a population geneticist at Riken Institute, had been studying the genetic heritage of Japan's indigenous populations when her research took an unexpected turn that would connect molecular biology with the underwater monuments that had captured the world's attention. Traditional models of Japanese population genetics had identified three main ancestral groups: the Jomon hunter-gatherers who first populated the islands over 15,000 years ago, the Yayoi rice farmers who arrived from mainland Asia around 2,300 years ago, and the Kofun period immigrants who brought additional continental influences around 1,400 years ago. This three-layer model had dominated academic understanding for decades, providing a neat explanation for the complex genetic landscape of modern Japan. But when Hayashi's team began analyzing high-resolution genetic data from populations living near the underwater archaeological sites, they discovered something that didn't fit the established model. Embedded within the DNA of coastal communities around Yonaguni, Okinawa, and the East China Sea region was a fourth genetic component, a distinctive lineage that appeared to be far older than any of the known ancestral groups. This mystery lineage carried genetic markers that suggested extreme antiquity, possibly dating back over 20,000 years. Even more intriguingly, it showed signs of having been isolated from other human populations for extended periods, as if its carriers had lived in geographic or cultural separation from the rest of humanity for millennia, before eventually mixing with later arrivals to the Japanese archipelago. When Hayashi collaborated with international geneticists to compare this enigmatic DNA signature with genetic databases from around the world, the results were puzzling. The mystery lineage showed distant relationships to populations from Southeast Asia, Melanesia, and even the Americas, but it didn't match any known contemporary or historical population exactly. It was as if this genetic component represented a branch of the human family tree that had diverged early and developed in isolation, preserving ancient characteristics that had been lost elsewhere. Dr. Tetsuya Nakamura, a specialist in ancient DNA who joined Hayashi's research team, made an even more startling discovery when he analyzed genetic samples from archaeological sites near the underwater monuments. Bone fragments recovered from Jomon period settlements in coastal areas showed an unusually high concentration of the mystery lineage markers. The people who had lived closest to what are now submerged archaeological sites appeared to carry the strongest genetic signatures of this ancient population. The implications were extraordinary. If the mystery lineage represented descendants of the civilization that had built the underwater monuments, then their genetic legacy had survived the catastrophic flooding that had claimed their cities. The builders of Yonaguni and the East China Sea temples hadn't vanished completely. They had integrated with later populations, passing down not only their genes, but potentially their knowledge through biological inheritance. This possibility led Hayashi to explore cutting-edge research in epigenetics, the study of how environmental experiences can alter gene expression in ways that are passed down to subsequent generations. Recent studies had shown that traumatic events could leave molecular scars in DNA that influenced the behavior and physiology of descendants for multiple generations. If a catastrophic flooding event had nearly wiped out an advanced civilization, the trauma might have been encoded into the genetic memory of the survivors. Even more intriguingly, some populations carrying high concentrations of the mystery lineage showed unusual neurological characteristics that might be related to heightened sensitivity to electromagnetic fields and subtle environmental changes. These traits appeared most frequently in families with long histories of serving as shrine keepers, traditional healers, or craftsmen specializing in the maintenance of sacred sites. Exactly the kinds of roles that would have required intimate knowledge of the Dragon Line network. Dr. Hayashi began to wonder whether the ancient knowledge of Japan's energy systems hadn't been lost at all, but had been preserved through genetic inheritance. The ability to sense and work with subtle earth energies might not have been mystical superstition, but a biological adaptation that had been passed down through specific bloodlines for thousands of years. To test this hypothesis, Hayashi's team conducted experiments with individuals carrying high concentrations of the mystery lineage markers. When exposed to weak electromagnetic fields similar to those found at Dragon Line intersection points, These subjects showed measurably different brainwave patterns compared to control groups. Their nervous systems appeared to be naturally attuned to the same energy frequencies that Mizuno had detected at Japan's ancient sacred sites. The most remarkable discovery came when the research team visited active shrine complexes, where traditional ceremonies were still performed according to ancient protocols. Shrine keepers whose families had maintained these sites for centuries and who carried the highest concentrations of mystery lineage DNA demonstrated an uncanny ability to detect subtle changes in the electromagnetic environment around the sacred structures. They could sense optimal timing for rituals, identify areas where the energy flow was disrupted, and even predict minor seismic activity before it registered on conventional instruments. The implications extended far beyond Japan. If genetic memory could preserve knowledge of Earth energy systems, then similar abilities might exist in other populations descended from ancient civilizations. The mystery lineage wasn't just evidence of Japan's forgotten past. It was proof that human beings could evolve biological capabilities for interacting with planetary forces that modern science was only beginning to understand. But unlocking the secrets encoded in DNA was only the first step toward rediscovering technologies that might be crucial for humanity's future survival. The answers to Japan's ancient mysteries might be written not in stone or star charts, but in the very DNA of the Japanese people themselves. Dr. Naomi Hayashi, a population geneticist at Riken Institute, had been studying the genetic heritage of Japan's indigenous populations when her research took an unexpected turn that would connect molecular biology with the underwater monuments that had captured the world's attention. Traditional models of Japanese population genetics had identified three main ancestral groups: the Jomon hunter-gatherers, who first populated the islands over 15,000 years ago, the Yayoi rice farmers who arrived from mainland Asia around 2,300 years ago, and the Kofun period immigrants who brought additional continental influences around 1,400 years ago. This three-layer model had dominated academic understanding for decades, providing a neat explanation for the complex genetic landscape of modern Japan. But when Hayashi's team began analyzing high-resolution genetic data from populations living near the underwater archaeological sites, they discovered something that didn't fit the established model. Embedded within the DNA of coastal communities around Yonaguni, Okinawa, and the East China Sea region was a fourth genetic component, a distinctive lineage that appeared to be far older than any of the known ancestral groups. This mystery lineage carried genetic markers that suggested extreme antiquity, possibly dating back over 20,000 years. Even more intriguingly, it showed signs of having been isolated from other human populations for extended periods, as if its carriers had lived in geographic or cultural separation from the rest of humanity for millennia, before eventually mixing with later arrivals to the Japanese archipelago. When Hayashi collaborated with international geneticists to compare this enigmatic DNA signature with genetic databases from around the world, the results were puzzling. The mystery lineage showed distant relationships to populations from Southeast Asia, Melanesia, and even the Americas, but it didn't match any known contemporary or historical population exactly. It was as if this genetic component represented a branch of the human family tree that had diverged early and developed in isolation, preserving ancient characteristics that had been lost elsewhere. Dr. Tetsuya Nakamura, a specialist in ancient DNA who joined Hayashi's research team, made an even more startling discovery when he analyzed genetic samples from archaeological sites near the underwater monuments. Bone fragments recovered from Jomon period settlements in coastal areas showed an unusually high concentration of the mystery lineage markers. The people who had lived closest to what are now submerged archaeological sites appeared to carry the strongest genetic signatures of this ancient population. The implications were extraordinary. If the mystery lineage represented descendants of the civilization that had built the underwater monuments, then their genetic legacy had survived the catastrophic flooding that had claimed their cities. The builders of Yonaguni and the East China Sea temples hadn't vanished completely. They had integrated with later populations, passing down not only their genes, but potentially their knowledge through biological inheritance. This possibility led Hayashi to explore cutting-edge research in epigenetics, the study of how environmental experiences can alter gene expression in ways that are passed down to subsequent generations. Recent studies had shown that traumatic events could leave molecular scars in DNA that influenced the behavior and physiology of descendants for multiple generations. If a catastrophic flooding event had nearly wiped out an advanced civilization, the trauma might have been encoded into the genetic memory of the survivors. Even more intriguingly, some populations carrying high concentrations of the mystery lineage showed unusual neurological characteristics that might be related to heightened sensitivity to electromagnetic fields and subtle environmental changes. These traits appeared most frequently in families with long histories of serving as shrine keepers, traditional healers, or craftsmen specializing in the maintenance of sacred sites. Exactly the kinds of roles that would have required intimate knowledge of the Dragon Line network. Dr. Hayashi began to wonder whether the ancient knowledge of Japan's energy systems hadn't been lost at all, but had been preserved through genetic inheritance. The ability to sense and work with subtle earth energies might not have been mystical superstition, but a biological adaptation that had been passed down through specific bloodlines for thousands of years. To test this hypothesis, Hayashi's team conducted experiments with individuals carrying high concentrations of the mystery lineage, markers. When exposed to weak electromagnetic fields similar to those found at Dragon Line intersection points, these subjects showed measurably different brainwave patterns compared to control groups. Their nervous systems appeared to be naturally attuned to the same energy frequencies that Mizuno had detected at Japan's ancient sacred sites. The most remarkable discovery came when the research team visited active shrine complexes, where traditional ceremonies were still performed according to ancient protocols. Shrine keepers whose families had maintained these sites for centuries and who carried the highest concentrations of mystery lineage DNA, demonstrated an uncanny ability to detect subtle changes in the electromagnetic environment around the sacred structures. They could sense optimal timing for rituals, identify areas where the energy flow was disrupted, and even predict minor seismic activity before it registered on conventional instruments. The implications extended far beyond Japan. If genetic memory could preserve knowledge of Earth energy systems, then similar abilities might exist in other populations descended from ancient civilizations. The mystery lineage wasn't just evidence of Japan's forgotten past. It was proof that human beings could evolve biological capabilities for interacting with planetary forces that modern science was only beginning to understand. But unlocking the secrets encoded in DNA was only the first step toward rediscovering technologies that might be crucial for humanity's future survival. The breakthrough came not from looking at the underwater structures, but from listening to them. Dr. Akira Yamada, an acoustic engineer who specialized in underwater sound propagation, had been recruited to study the unusual audio phenomena that deep-sea researchers had been reporting around the Yonaguni monument. Divers working at the site had described hearing strange harmonics and resonant tones that seemed to emanate from the stone structures themselves, even in the absence of any obvious sound source. When Yamada deployed his specialized hydrophone arrays around the monument, he discovered that the ancient structure was indeed generating sound. Complex acoustic patterns that resulted from the interaction of ocean currents with the precisely carved channels, chambers, and surfaces of the underwater complex. But these weren't random noises created by water flow over stone. They were carefully engineered acoustic effects that demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of sound physics and resonant frequency manipulation. The monument's builders had carved the stone surfaces with mathematical precision to create specific acoustic resonances when water moved through the structure. Different chambers produced different frequencies, and the overall effect was a kind of underwater organ that used ocean currents as its wind source. When Yamada analyzed the frequency spectrum of the sounds produced by the monument, he found that they corresponded to specific electromagnetic frequencies that Mizuno had detected at Dragon Line intersection points on land. The implications were staggering. The underwater structures weren't just architectural monuments. They were massive acoustic instruments designed to generate sound waves that could influence electromagnetic fields across vast distances. When Yamada expanded his acoustic survey to include the other underwater sites discovered in the East China Sea, he found that they formed components of an integrated sound transmission network. Each structure was positioned at optimal distances to create acoustic resonance patterns that could carry complex information across the ocean floor. Low-frequency sound waves, generated by the interaction of tidal flows with the precisely carved stone surfaces, could travel hundreds of kilometers through the dense medium of seawater with minimal distortion. Dr. Reika Fujimoto, a specialist in ancient communication systems who joined Yamada's research team, recognized the acoustic patterns as a form of coded information transmission. The varying frequencies, rhythms, and harmonic combinations produced by the underwater monuments appeared to encode astronomical data, tidal calculations, and seismic warnings in a format that could be decoded by anyone who understood the mathematical principles underlying the system. The sophistication of this acoustic technology became even more apparent when the research team discovered that the underwater structures were designed to respond to specific sound frequencies generated from above the surface. When traditional Japanese drums and flutes were played at precise locations on the coastline, the underwater monuments would resonate in response, creating feedback loops that could amplify and modulate the acoustic signals across vast distances. This suggested that the ancient civilization had developed a form of long-distance communication technology that combined architecture, acoustics, and environmental engineering in ways that modern science was only beginning to understand. But the acoustic technology served purposes beyond mere communication. When Yamada's team analyzed the specific frequencies produced by the underwater monuments, they discovered that many corresponded to sound ranges known to have profound effects on human physiology and consciousness. The low-frequency vibrations generated by the structures fell within the range of infrasound, frequencies below the threshold of human hearing that can nevertheless influence brainwave patterns, emotional states, and even cellular regeneration. Traditional Japanese healing practices had long incorporated the use of specific sound frequencies for therapeutic purposes. Temple bells, singing bowls, and ceremonial chants were all designed to produce acoustic resonances that could induce meditative states, reduce stress, and promote physical healing. The underwater monuments appeared to represent a vastly scaled-up version of these same principles, creating environmental acoustic conditions that could influence the health and consciousness of entire populations. Dr. Yamada began to suspect that the Dragon Line network and the underwater acoustic system had been designed to work together as an integrated technology for maintaining both individual and collective well-being. The electromagnetic fields generated by the Dragon Lines could be modulated and enhanced by the acoustic frequencies produced by the submerged monuments, creating a planetary healing system that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. When the research team tested the effects of exposure to the monument's acoustic frequencies on volunteers carrying high concentrations of the mystery lineage DNA, the results were remarkable. Subjects exposed to recordings of the underwater monument's acoustic patterns showed enhanced cognitive function, improved pattern recognition abilities, and, most significantly, increased sensitivity to electromagnetic fields and subtle environmental changes. It was as if the ancient sound frequencies were activating dormant capabilities encoded in their genetic heritage, awakening biological potentials that had been suppressed for thousands of years. Even more extraordinary was the discovery that these awakened abilities appeared to be heritable. Children of volunteers who had undergone acoustic exposure testing showed enhanced sensitivities from birth, suggesting that the sound technology could activate epigenetic changes that were passed on to subsequent generations. The ancient civilization hadn't just developed a communication and healing system, they had created a method for enhancing human evolution itself. The implications were profound and unsettling. If the underwater acoustic technology could influence human consciousness and genetic expression on such a fundamental level, then its submersion beneath the rising seas hadn't just been the loss of monuments. It had been the deactivation of a planetary system designed to guide human development. Modern humanity was living in a world where the technological infrastructure for our own enhancement had been turned off for over 10,000 years. As Dr. Yamada compiled his findings, he realized that the true purpose of the Dragon Network was finally becoming clear. But understanding the system's function was only the beginning. The question now was whether it could be reactivated, and whether humanity was ready for what that might unleash. Today, as climate change accelerates the melting of polar ice and the rising of sea levels around the world, the underwater monuments of Japan are beginning to reveal new secrets. Advanced deep-sea exploration technology has penetrated deeper into the submerged structures than ever before, uncovering chambers and passages that have remained sealed since the last ice age. What the explorers are finding challenges every assumption about the scope and sophistication of the ancient civilization that once flourished above the waves. Dr. Kenta Shibata, leading a new international research consortium equipped with the most advanced underwater robotics available, has discovered that the Yonaguni monument and its sister structures throughout the region are far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The visible portions of these underwater complexes represent only the outermost layers of massive underground networks that extend deep into the bedrock of the ocean floor. Using ground-penetrating sonar and seismic imaging, Shibata's team has mapped corridors, chambers, and mechanical systems that suggest the ancient builders possessed engineering capabilities that rival or exceed modern technology. Most remarkably, many of these deeper systems appear to be intact and potentially functional, as if they had been designed to survive submersion and continue operating beneath the sea. Recent expeditions have recovered artifacts from the deeper chambers that defy conventional understanding. Crystalline structures that appear to be some form of information storage technology. Metallic components that show no signs of corrosion despite their age, and mechanical devices whose purpose remains tantalizingly unclear, but whose precision manufacturing suggests advanced materials science. The most significant discovery came when Shibata's team detected signs of electrical activity within the deepest chambers they had accessed. Weak electromagnetic fields, pulsing in complex patterns that seemed to respond to tidal cycles and lunar phases, suggested that some components of the ancient technology were still functioning after more than 10,000 years of submersion. The implications were staggering. If the underwater systems were still partially operational, then the entire Dragon Line network might be capable of reactivation. This possibility has attracted the attention of governments and corporations worldwide, each eager to understand and potentially exploit technology that could revolutionize everything from energy production to human consciousness enhancement. But the rush to unlock the secrets of the underwater monuments has also raised profound ethical questions about humanity's readiness to wield such power. Dr. Yumi Tanaka, a bioethicist who has been monitoring the research developments, warns that reactivating technology capable of influencing human genetic expression and consciousness could have unpredictable consequences for the species. The ancient civilization that created these systems had thousands of years to develop the wisdom and restraint necessary to use them responsibly. Modern humanity, with its history of weaponizing every new discovery, might not possess the same level of collective maturity, yet the choice may no longer be entirely up to human decision-makers. Climate change and rising sea levels are altering the conditions around the underwater monuments in ways that appear to be triggering automatic responses from the ancient systems. As warmer ocean currents shift the acoustic properties of the submerged structures, dormant technologies are beginning to reactivate on their own. The Dragon Line network, silent for millennia, is starting to emit detectable electromagnetic signals that correlate with increasing seismic activity throughout the Pacific Ring of Fire. Individuals carrying high concentrations of the mystery lineage DNA have begun reporting vivid dreams and intuitive insights that seem to contain detailed knowledge of technologies and systems they have never studied. Children born to families near the underwater sites are demonstrating abilities that their parents cannot explain. Enhanced pattern recognition, sensitivity to subtle environmental changes, and in some cases, apparent telepathic connections with others sharing similar genetic heritage. Dr. Emi Watanabe, a child psychologist studying these phenomena, has documented cases of young people who seem to instinctively understand how to interact with the Dragon Line network, locating energy nodes and predicting seismic events with accuracy that defies conventional explanation. These children speak of hearing the Earth's heartbeat and feeling the stone memories, describing experiences that align perfectly with the acoustic and electromagnetic properties that researchers have measured at the ancient sites. Whether these developments represent the natural awakening of humanity's next evolutionary phase or the beginning of an uncontrolled experiment in genetic enhancement remains unclear. What is certain is that the dragon is stirring, and its awakening may be beyond human power to control or contain. As ocean levels continue to rise and ancient coastlines shift once again, more structures are being revealed in waters around the world. Each discovery adds new pieces to a puzzle that suggests human civilization has risen and fallen in cycles far longer and more complex than our recorded histories suggest. The monuments beneath Japan's waters may be only the most accessible remnants of a global network of ancient technologies that once connected continents and guided human development across millennia. Perhaps the most profound implication of these discoveries is not technological, but philosophical. If our ancestors possessed knowledge and capabilities that we are only now beginning to rediscover, then the linear narrative of human progress, the comforting belief that we are the most advanced humans who have ever lived, may be nothing more than a collective delusion. We may be not pioneers of a new age, but students struggling to understand lessons taught by teachers whose names we have forgotten. The dragon lines still pulse beneath our feet. The acoustic frequencies still resonate through underwater chambers. The genetic memories still whisper in the blood of their descendants. Whether humanity chooses to listen to these ancient voices, or continues to stumble forward in willful ignorance of its own past, remains the great question of our time. The sunken dragon dreams beneath the waves, and slowly it begins to wake.